YouTube. In this quick video, I'm just going to touch two different artifacts. The first one that we're going to start with is called the Black Prism. This was created during the time of Shalmaneser III, one of the kings of Assyria. And honestly, I think the reason why it's important to go over this right now is I know a lot of you brothers who are growing in the knowledge and understanding. You try to reach out to friends, you try to reach out to family, and you try to explain to them that, the so-called Israelites of the Bible were people of color. They weren't quote unquote Middle Eastern, definitely weren't Caucasian. And sometimes you'll lead them to certain verses in Revelations, or you might lead them to other verses that describe the Israelites as people of color. But sometimes people don't have faith, so seeing is believing. So I think it's very important to go over these certain historical images that demonstrate who the Israelites were. And for those of you brothers who don't know, basically the black stone, as well as the hexagonal prism, another object that I'm going to go over. Both of these were discovered in the 1800s. This particular artifact was discovered back in 1846. So let's let you know that the powers that be have known about this information for a long time now. They just don't let you know about it. They want to keep you ignorant and at a lower state. And as you brothers can clearly see as well, these men on the depictions are people of color. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Yeah, that might be good enough. You can see kind of the woolly hair and the woolly beards. For those brothers who don't know, this is depicting Israelites during basically the reign of Shalmaneser III, offering tribute. And as you can see, there's even a few brothers here with chains on the neck being presented as servants, as slaves. But yeah, I just want to get into an article, so let's get there. Okay, the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser and the earliest depiction of an Israelite. Discovered by Sir Austin Henry Layard in 1846, the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III is considered the only complete Assyrian obelisk ever found. This perfectly preserved monument commemorates 31 years of the Assyrian king Shalmaneser's three military conquests. Could this artifact contain the only known depiction of an Israelite king? If so, who is the Israelite king, and how sure is this evidence? Well, I'll do a little bit of spoiler alerts. The Israelite king depicted in this artifact is the king Jehu. But continuing on, the obelisk was found by Sir Austin and his team at Nimrud Biblical Kala or ancient Kalhu, located in modern-day Iraq, and later transferred to the British Museum, where it still resides. And this is a quick aside. This is what all these museums do, because I'm sure there are many more artifacts that they've discovered that they have hidden in their basement in places like the British Museum, the Louvre, the Smithsonian. They have so much of our history when it comes to just written records, when it comes to artifacts, when it comes to certain documentations that prove who the Israelites are, not only in the ancient times but through the relatively modern times. When I mean relatively modern times, I'm talking about AD onward, because there's plenty of different pictures and I'm sure documents that demonstrated that our people, in whatever region they were scattered, whether it was in places of North America, being the native tribes, whether there were the different kings and queens of Europe, whether they're parts of Western Africa. I'm sure there are many different documents and artifacts that demonstrated that all these people knew that they were descendants of the people of the book. But that's an aside. Continuing on, standing just under 2 meters, 6.5 feet tall, and made of black limestone, this stele was erected in 825 BCE. The four-sided obelisk has 5 vertically arranged panels on each side, a total of 20 panels. Each panel tells a story about one of the subdued kings or rulers from Shalmaneser's conquest. The Akkadian cuneiform inscriptions and carved reliefs narrate horizontally around the obelisk in a counterclockwise direction. One of these 20 panels has become more popular than the rest. It depicts an Israelite king bowing down before and offering gifts to Shalmaneser III. And as you can see in this little description, it says drawing of King Jehu paying tribute to Shalmaneser III depicted on the black obelisk. Now you can see this kind of a cartoonish drawing is gone out their way to quote unquote, I won't say make them Caucasian, but make them quote unquote Middle Eastern. So they don't look quite exactly like so-called black men. But since we mentioned the Shalmaneser III, let's just get some information on him. And let's get some information on Shalmaneser III. Shalmaneser III The god Shalmunu is preeminent, was king of Assyria from 859 to 824 BC, and the son of the previous ruler Ashur Ashur Ashurnasirpal per II, whatever. His long reign was a constant series of campaign against the eastern tribes. Like we read in the previous article, that campaign was over 30 years. He was warring and trying to conquer. And honestly, that's how the ancient world was for the most part, other than the reign of Solomon, which was peaceful. All these different kings throughout their entire lifetime were warring in order to, receive land, riches, natural resources, even people to be their servants. All these kings were competing basically for rulership of that entire quote unquote Middle Eastern area. But continuing on, his long reign was a constant series of campaigns against the eastern tribes, the Babylonians, the nations of Mesopotamia and Syria, as well as Uzanwadna and Erushra. His armies penetrated the Lake Van and the Taurus Mountains. The Neo-Hittites of Carchemish were compelled to pay tribute, and the kings of Hamath and Aram Damascus were subdued. In the annals of Shalmaneser III from the 1850s BC, the Arabs and the Chaldeans first appear in recorded history. And again, the Chaldeans will later be considered the Neo-Babylonian Empire, other Nebuchadnezzar the first, but specifically his son Nebuchadnezzar the first, which I'm sure all you brothers are aware of. He's really what made the nation of Babylon, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, very famous. Continue on. Shalmaneser began a campaign against Horatian kingdom and reported that in 858 BC he demolished the cities of Sagunya, and then in 853 BC also Araskon. Both cities are assumed to have been capitals of the kingdom before Tushpa became a center of the Horatrians. In 853, a coalition was formed between 11 states, mainly by Hadadezer, the Armenian king of Damascus, Uruhelini, king of Hamath, Ahab, king of Israel, Yenubu, king of the Arabs, and some other rulers who fought the Assyrian king at the Battle of Akkar. And for those of you brothers who don't know, Hamath, I believe, was another name for Syria, specifically Syria, not Assyria, but Syria. And for those of you brothers, when you see the king of Israel, it's not talking about the entire nation of Israel, because at this point, both the kingdoms have been divided for a long period of time now. The northern kingdom, Israel, did join this coalition. However, the southern kingdom, Judah, was not a part of this coalition, and it was for their benefit. The result of the battle was not decisive, and Shalmaneser III had to fight his enemy several times again in the coming years, which eventually resulted in the occupation of the Levant, which is modern Syria and Lebanon, and Arabia by the Assyrian Empire. In 851 BC, following a rebellion in Babylon, Shalmaneser led a campaign against Marduk bel Usate, young brother of the king, Marduk Zakir Shumi, who was an ally of Shalmaneser. And again, that's just a naming convention of the ancient world. For those of you brothers who don't know, many kings would name themselves based on the gods. Of course, Marduk being one of the gods of ancient Babylon, one of the chief gods. So that's why the king's name was Marduk Sakir Shumi I. Now let's continue on. A record of these events was made on the Black Obelisk. In the 8th year of my reign, Marduk bel Usate, the younger brother, revolted against Marduk Sakir Sumi, king of the Chaldeans, and they divided the land in its entirety. In order to avenge Marduk Sakir Sumi, I marched out and captured Maternot. In the 9th year of my reign, I marched against Akkad a second time. I besieged Gennati. As for Marduk Usade, the terrifying splendor of Assur and Marduk overcame him, and he went up into the mountains to save his life. I pursued him. I cut down the sword Marduk bel Usate and the rebel army officers who were with him. Now, this says against Israel. In 841 BC, Shalmaneser campaigned against Hadazazer's successor, Hazazel, forcing him to take a refuge within the walls of his capital. Now, Hazazel was the king of the Syrians at the time, and it was actually funny. I believe it was either the prophet Elijah. I believe it was the prophet Elijah. For those of you brothers, I believe it's First Kings in the 19th chapter. The prophet Elijah gave a prophecy stating that this king Azazel would be ruler over the Assyrians, or excuse me, not the Syrians, Syria, the Syrians, and that he would cause great havoc and destruction on the Israelites. And of course, after receiving that prophecy, he actually killed the previous leader, Hadadezer. But continuing on, While Shalmaneser was unable to capture Damascus, he devastated its territory, and Jehu of Israel, whose ambassadors are represented on the Black Obelisk now in the British Museum, together with the Phoenician cities, prudently sent tribute to him in perhaps 841 BC. Babylonia had already been conquered, including the areas occupied by migrant Chaldea, Sudian, and Aramean tribes, and the Babylonian king had been put to death. Okay, so now that he mentioned those minerals, let's go see uh, how these brothers paid their tribute. So this is a zoomed out image of the one that we saw earlier in the article. As you can see, what's depicted below really does not even look like the brothers that are depicted above. As you can see, all these men lined up here are Israelites, and the man bowing down, that's the King Jehu bowing down before Shalmaneser III. Okay, we just want to do a close up of this image. As you can see, you see the woolly hair, and as you can see, the man below, which is Jehu, the king of Israel, you see he has the dreadlocks, also the woolly beard. And this is just an aside, but nothing's new under the sun. Brothers had style even back in the day. I mean, look at him. He got a little like a beanie or like a little cap. He's looking a little swaggy with the cap. And then also, you can see there's the fringes as well. So that's another way you're able to know that these brothers are Israelites due to the fringes that they're wearing. And of course, you see on the left hand side, this is the King Shalmaneser the third. He has a cup in his hand. He has his royal attendants as well. Also, this is just going to be a quick aside for this image that you see right here. This is the image of the god Marduk with the wings. By the way, this is what's the inspiration where that Air Jordan image comes from. Because pride is kept, and I'm sure a lot of you brothers already know this. Many of the images that you see from many different corporations and companies are all based on ancient ancient like Babylonian or either Kemetic gods or some type of mysteries. Like for example, as well, the swoosh image for the company Nike that's actually supposed to represent the rings of Saturn, and even the name Nike or Nike is a reference to the I believe it's the Roman goddess of war. And for another example, the reason why I know how that swoosh for Nike represents the ring of Saturn is because prior to Nike being the name Nike being chosen, they were the creators of the company were considering it naming it Dimension Six. Now, of course, we know Dimension Six. That's in reference to the planet Saturn. But now, let me not go too much on a digression. Again, as you can see, this image right here depicting the King Jehu bowing down before not Nebuchadnezzar, Shalmaneser III. And as you can clearly tell, these are all so-called black men. Yeah, I just wanted to do a close-up of the picture of Jehu. Again, as you can see, he has the woolly beard and he also has the dreadlocks. Again, just depicting him as a so-called man of color. So for those of you brothers who have friends and families who are kind of doubting you about, claiming that the people of the book were people of color, it's like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Where are you getting all this information from? Here you go. This is a little bit of a pictorial evidence that you can show them to help demonstrate what you're saying is not based on how you feel, it's based on what you know. Because knowledge is power, man, especially in these times when, like it says in Hosea 4 and 6, our people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Many of our people walk the earth today and they don't even understand their lineage. They don't understand who they come from, and that's why they're in utter darkness now. But that's just a digression. Okay, so now we're going back to the original article. I just want to continue to read to get additional information. The inscription reads, "The tribute of Jehu, son of Omri. I received from him silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase with pointed bottom, golden tumblers, golden buckets, tin, a staff for a king, and spears." Now, I'm sure many of you brothers who read the scriptures know that Jehu was not one of the sons of Omri, because Omri's line was destroyed, and that was to fulfill a biblical prophecy. But again, that term son, sometimes it can be referenced to your literal son, but in the case of Jehu, he was just a descendant in terms of the kingship. So that's why he was called the son of Omri. The inscription identifies Jehu as a king who was bowing down and paying tribute, and it identifies Jehu as a successor of Omri, the father of the northern kingdom of Israel. That's 1 Kings 16, 2 Kings 9 and 10. This description confirms the existence of two biblical kings of Israel, but how does this history square with the Bible? Encyclopedia Britannica says in 841 BCE, he, Shalmaneser, defeated Hazael, and after failing to capture Damascus itself, marched to the Mediterranean coast where he received tribute from Tyre, Sidon, and Samaria. The submission of the later is shown on the black obelisk from Nimrud, now in the British Museum, where Jehu, son of Omri, bows before Shalmaneser. So the context of Jehu's submission was just after Shalmaneser defeated Hazael, the king of Syria, in 2 Kings 8:7-15. Notice 2 Kings 10:32 says, "In those days the Lord began to reduce Israel, and Hazael harassed them throughout the territory of Israel." Jewish Publication Society. So during the reign of Jehu, Syrian king of Hazael was harassing Israel and attacking his land. The time frames line up perfectly with the biblical account. And we see another image depicting Shalmaneser and his army. Continuing on. Verse 31 reveals why these attacks were coming upon Israel. But Jehu was not careful to follow the teaching of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn away from the sins that Jeroboam had caused Israel to commit. Jehu didn't turn from the sins of Jeroboam. Sure, he did a great work by removing Baal worship from Israel, but he kept the two golden calves which were worshipped in Dan and Bethel, even though they were still worshiping the same God. Yahweh or Yahweh, they were not worshiping him in the manner he commanded. And to this day, this is something that our people struggle with, especially a lot of our people who are latched on to the quote unquote Christian church. They profess the Most High with their mouth, but like in the scripture says, their mind, meaning their heart, their spirit, their understanding, is very far away from him. So there's nothing new under the sun. Because of this sin, God used Hazael and Shalmaneser to correct Israel. Jehu managed to pay off the Assyrians, as did his successor Jehoash and many other Israelite kings. That only delayed the inevitable. It was only a matter of time until Israel fell into Assyrian captivity. Between 721 and 718 BCE, the kingdom of Israel was taken into Assyrian captivity. From there, Israel appears to have disappeared from history. For those of you brothers who know a little bit about history, that's just not true. Unless every Israelite from the northern kingdom was killed, you don't just disappear from history. But that's a completely other topic that I want to discuss in a future video when it comes to who the Israelites were, specifically the northern kingdom, where they settled to, and what they were known as throughout history. But for those of you brothers who want a quick head start, you can do some research on the Scythians, specifically the Saka or Sakea, Saka, or the sons of Isaac. But yeah, let me continue. But that's not where the story ends for the northern tribes of Israel. Unofficial ambassador for world peace and author Herbert W. Armstrong established an iron bridge relationship with Israel's political leaders and academics. Through the 1960s and 80s, his work supported major archaeological excavations in Jerusalem, including Naaman's Avagon's excavation in the Jewish quarter, Benjamin Mazur's excavation at the southern wall of the Temple Mount, and Yigal Shiloh's excavation of the city of David. In his book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, Herbert W. Armstrong explained much of the history of Israel by putting secular history next to the Bible to trace the steps of Israel's lost tribes. To learn about what happened to the lost 10 tribes who were taken into captivity, please order a free copy of The United States and Britain in Prophecy. So just assuming on the title of the book, maybe he's one of those authors where there's actually a term that was created for people like this who are Hebrew, I think it's like Hebrew Britanism or something along those lines. Basically, people in England, this was very popular, especially in the mid to late 1800s, who were able to find certain archaeological records, were able to understand the meaning of certain words, and due to that, were able to tie the understanding that the people of Britain, or the people of the covenant, which is what that word Britain means, were the ancient Israelites. That's a whole nother topic, and I believe I touched on it lightly, maybe on my video when it came to King James and the Royal House of Stuart. I can't quite recall though. But yeah, I've covered everything when it comes to the Black Obelisk. So now let's get on to the next topic.